Hi students, it's Mrs. T, and this is week 10 of Cultural Geography class. I'm coming to you today from my makeshift classroom at home because all of us are going through a significant transition, not only in our educational careers, but also in our work life, in our available resources in our homes, in our health, all sorts of issues that are happening right now as we go through this physical distancing so that we can flatten that curve of the coronavirus in our nation and in our world. So I know all of you are going through a great deal of stressful events in your lives. Some of you have already reached out to me, whether you were my online student or my face-to-face student before spring break. All of you are my online students now. And the face-to-face students have that additional challenge of becoming online students, but that doesn't mean that those students who started out as online students don't have some of the same stresses. I know some of you have lost your jobs. I know some of you have become sick. It's allergy season anyway, and so I know I had a little bit of a sore throat last week, and I was really worried. Am I one of the people who needs to have this test? Do I need to watch other things? These are stressful times. We've got high-risk people in our families, people who depend on us. Perhaps we've been separated from loved ones because of a quarantine. There's all kinds of stressors that are coming at us at every different direction. And I understand, and I'm not free from those stressors myself. So I want you to know that the semester is continuing. However, I want to be as flexible with you as possible so that whether you were my online student from the beginning or my face-to-face student who's transitioning to the online environment now, all of us can work together to finish out this semester with success. You started the semester with success as your goal, and so did I. So let's transition here, and you work with me, offering me pointers about how to make this transition better as we go through these next 5 weeks until exam week. Okay? So, online students are already accustomed to the Saturday at noon reaction paper time and the Sunday at noon quiz time. So that does not change at all for online students, but you face-to-face students who are now participating in class this way, that's going to be our new schedule for our weekly assignments that we've done together up to this point. I'm also going to be using discussion boards, and if bandwidth allows, internet speed, upload and download capacity allows, we're going to use Blackboard Collaborate some for face-to-face students, but online students, I'm going to offer you that same opportunity to chat with me and your face-to-face counterparts at least once a week. Like I said, if we can manage the bandwidth issues that the school is having, but also the Blackboard Corporation nationwide is having some issues about having enough bandwidth available for all of us faculty members who want to use it, to be able to use it at those key times during the day when so many students across the United States have class times, like a Tuesday, Thursday, 9:25 class that our face-to-face class was before this online transition. So I'm with you. I understand the stress. I want to make this as easy a transition as possible. I could use your help with suggestions on how to do that. So until I hear from you to modify what I'm doing to make it easier on you, let's just dive right on into another chapter of cultural geography. So this week, week 10, we will cover chapter 9, which is on urban geography. Urban is a word that we've looked at already before when we were talking about the demographic transition model. part of stage 2 and 3, like the transition between stage 2 and 3, and then it's certainly into 4, has urbanization occurring, which corresponds to the Industrial Revolution that you and I have studied very often in classes that we've taken in the past, whether it was a history class or a civics class, a philosophy class even. We talk about urbanization and how that changes people's mindset, and it certainly changes social structure. So urbanization is building cities, building up of cities. Human beings did not always live in cities, and that's one of the key points that we need to start with in this urban geography chapter. We need to back up way before the Industrial Revolution that we've discussed already and look at the first wave of urbanization, the first urbanization revolution, if you will, that occurred in human history. I'm a geography teacher. I just said history. I'm not going to ask you to memorize dates or anything, but we are going to go back in time and we're going to talk about places. We're going to talk about why certain things happened where and what enabled things to happen in those places and how certain places like Mesopotamia, like the Indus River in India, and some of those places where we looked at as having religious hearths from our previous lectures, how those places also became urban hearths and spread that city power, that city center kind of economic and religious and social and cultural hearth from there to outer regions. Okay, so urban geography is the study of how we human beings use the land that we have in cities. How are cities organized? Why are cities organized? How do people use one space over the next? Why does this particular area of a town attract a particular activity? And why does that particular activity complement well with another activity that's in another sector or another region of a town? These kinds of things are the questions that we will ask and try to answer in the urban geography chapter. This is a really important chapter for people who want to go into local, state, or federal politics of any sort. This is a really interesting chapter to be studying when the U.S. Census is taking place, because the U.S. Census asks a whole lot of questions that urban geographers and city planners and city engineers use in order to make changes, repurpose areas, allocate funds to certain neighborhoods or certain industries within their region that affect cities and the dynamics of the cities. So this is a very important chapter that we might spend more than just our typical 2 days worth of a week, 2 class meetings in a week to study urban geography. Okay, but the first thing that I want to do with this mini lecture, I'm going to spend about 10-15 more minutes talking to you about some background of this, and then we'll stop this video and I'll make you another one or give you another one from YouTube or some other source that you can watch that complements this or builds onto the knowledge from the chapter. So I'm going to try moving forward to have smaller chunks of lectures with one topic in 15 or 20 minutes and then stop and move on to another topic in 15 or 20 minutes. Okay, so here's my first 15-minute or so chunk of lecture. So we want to know, where did cities come from? And we have to go way back in time to look at subsistence strategies. Subsistence strategies. Okay, now we discussed what a subsistence strategy is briefly back in the chapter, was it chapter 2, I think it was, when we talked about demographic transition. So chapter 2 and 3, I believe, when we were talking about the demographic transition model. Okay, subsistence strategies, this means a plan, well, the whole thing. A strategy is a plan, and to subsist is to survive. So a subsistence strategy is a plan for survival. A plan for survival. Many textbooks, like if you've taken anthropology, for instance, the anthropology textbook defines a subsistence strategy as a food-getting plan, a plan to get food. Yes, that's exactly what it is. However, survival has a little bit more, about a little bit more than just food getting, because we have some basic needs like food, definitely, that's a major one, but we also need to be able to have access to potable water. Potable is a word that simply means it's drinkable. It's not going to make us ill if we consume it. Water is a compound that is known as the universal solvent, which means things can dissolve in water, things that are harmful to humans, things that are beneficial to humans. It's why you can mix country time lemonade and it all dissolves, right? Water can carry a lot of things in it. Some things are harmful to humans and can kill them, while others either benefit us or don't affect us at all, one way or the other. So we also need water in order to survive. Clean water, that college level word to describe clean, drinkable water, is potable. Here's how you spell it. Potable water. And we also need shelter to survive. Sometimes we need shelter to survive. Okay, in a place like Arkansas, with all the varied weather that we have, and we have hail sometimes the size of a softball, and we have bitter, bitter cold winters sometimes, and super, super hot summers and humid, in a place like Arkansas, shelter is necessary to protect us so that we can survive one day to the next, because some of the environmental conditions can literally kill you. And so shelter is necessary in some places, but not all. Do you have to have the same kinds of shelter that you and I are accustomed to, or that you and I make assumptions about when we talk about where someone lives and the appropriateness versus inappropriateness of a permanent dwelling, or the structure of a permanent dwelling? So a subsistence strategy is a plan for survival. It is not incorrect to say that it's a food-getting plan, but it's more than just food. It's about clean water to drink and about shelter that we need sometimes in order to survive. So a plan for survival, how are we going to use the natural environment to get all of these things? Okay, that's what a subsistence strategy is. And I remember specifically talking about foraging. I think it was Lucas who laughed a little bit in class earlier this semester when I jumped. We were talking about demographic transition, and I jumped all the way from foraging 40,000 years into the future to the Industrial Revolution in that demographic transition model lecture. But foraging is the first, you could call it the original subsistence strategies that human beings used. Foraging does not manipulate the natural environment at all in order to get food, safe water, or shelter. Foragers use the natural life cycles of the animals, the plants, the materials that are in their natural environment to survive from day to day. They don't modify the environment at all. So in geography, one of our 5 themes is human-environment interaction, and modification is one of the ways that human beings can modify. Modification is one of the ways that human beings can interact with their environments. Foragers do not modify. They interact with their environment because they collect only the bare minimum that they need to survive, and they don't overtax the environment. Meaning they don't harvest all of the animals in a herd because they want to maintain that herd for future generations, so their food supply is always there and predictable. They don't collect seeds from plants that they regularly eat and save those seeds until planting season and plant them and control a new, larger, unnatural population of plants to be able to get food from that kind of population. So foragers do not modify the environment. They have a plan for survival, a subsistence strategy that works within the environment the same way any other animal in the environment does. Foraging does not allow for a high population density. You don't have cities. You do not have big places. You don't have big bands of people even. Foragers typically are in very small numbers. And so in human history, we don't see urbanization with foraging societies. Cities are not necessary, and they're not possible yet either, because the way a forager's plan for survival is, it does not support huge populations of people. Their plan for survival supports only small numbers of people, and so populations can't increase. So, another subsistence strategy is called pastoralism. Pastoralism is another subsistence strategy. A pastor, we might know as a religious word, that somebody who leads a flock of people to the Lord, for instance, in the Bible Belt. I've heard that phrase said often. But a pastor really is somebody who guides a herd. Okay, so pastoralism is a subsistence strategy that uses herd animals as the predominant source of food. Herd animals. So only certain animals travel in herds, things like goats, things like alpacas, things like bison, things like caribou, cows, certainly. All of those kinds of things are herd animals. And so a plan for survival that larger populations have in harsh environments that don't allow them to have uncontrolled populations of plants and animals to support their human population. Human beings are smart. Remember, we talked about possibilism at the very beginning of the semester. We can figure out a way to make the environment work on our behalf. And so pastoralists interact with their environment through finding an animal that thrives in that environment and building a herd of that animal, and then using those animals as their predominant food source in their subsistence strategy. So populations go up with pastoralism. However, you still don't see cities with the population density increase that pastoralism brings to the situation. Another subsistence strategy that you will find in our human history is something called horticulture. Now, I'm using this word differently than your biology teacher or your botany teacher, or if you Google the word horticulture and just look at any old random search engine pull that's going to show you on that page. Horticulture is a modern word that usually talks about specialized cultivation of fancy plants or something like that. And that's not what we're talking about here. When we say horticulture as a plan for survival or a subsistence strategy, horticulture is small scale agriculture. Very small scale. What I mean here when I say small scale agriculture is there is no surplus of food. There's no surplus. A surplus is something extra over and above what people need to survive from day to day. Horticulture doesn't produce a surplus. They don't grow extra things during a growing year in order to can things and use them over, the winter when plants don't typically grow. Horticulturalists interact with their environment through small-scale production of plants, mainly. This is an heavy animal source subsistence strategy. This is a heavy plant-based food subsistence strategy. Horticulturalists learn how to use their environment 12 months out of the year to provide the group of people with enough food to survive from day to day with no surplus involved. I keep on harping on this no surplus involved because this is a discussion about where urbanization came from, and you don't need or have urbanization until you are able to increase your population, and increasing population doesn't happen until surplus begins to be produced. When you have a surplus, then more human beings can be supported in the population, and more human beings are supported within that population. And so these subsistence strategies precede, they lead up to the very first urban revolution when you started to see cities, because these three subsistence strategies have no surplus involved, therefore the populations are very low. But when you transition to the next subsistence strategy, which is called agriculture, we have transitioned to very drastic modifications of the environment so that food surplus can be produced, and that food surplus enables more free time for more people in their daily lives. And so you can expand the kinds of jobs that people hold. We call that a division of labor. Not everybody, well, let me back up. Everybody every day in these subsistence strategies has to focus first on food getting and food getting only. They have free time after that, but after the free time, or after the food getting part of your day, most of your free time is also spent on figuring out making tools or making shelter or planning for tomorrow's day, teaching your offspring how to be a good forager or how to be a pastoralist or how to be a horticulturalist. So a lot of the free time that these folks have is spent on becoming better and learning techniques in order to be a successful forager, pastoralist, or horticulturalist. In agriculture, when you see surplus, this is surplus food production. Surplus food production. I'm running out of space on my tiny little dry erase board. But agriculture gives you a surplus, so your population can really increase. Very increased population. If you have a surplus, you need a place to be able to sell it. You don't just make a surplus so it sits there and rots. You make a surplus in order to be able to exchange whatever you have extra of with somebody who has extra of something else, or to exchange it for monetary reasons. And so cities, when agriculture became the dominant subsistence strategy on the planet, which was about 4,000 BC, roughly around 6,000 years ago, something like that, where you see agriculture really transitioning from any of these three subsistence strategies to most commonly agriculture, you see populations boom. You don't have to control the population anymore by controlling a birth rate. People aren't dying as early as they used to because there's plenty of food resources to keep them in good nutritional health so that they can overcome diseases and other kinds of things that might make them weak and unable to participate fully in a full, long life in society. So agriculture and that very first dawning of agriculture, the first urban revolution back 4,000, 2,000 BC, in that kind of range, this is where we first start to see cities. And so in our next mini lecture that we do together, we will dive right on into this city idea. How are cities organized? What happens in cities, how they become hearths or urban hearths and cultural centers, economic centers, religious centers, all of those kinds of things. How cities become part of the way that we create our cultural identity because they bring such diverse groups together into cities. So that will be what our next lecture is about. We're still way early as far as that Industrial Revolution that you and I have studied so often in our past. We're talking about like back in early biblical days that agriculture really took over as that dominant dominant subsistence strategy, and cities began to be built. And so that'll be our next topic when we see each other again. Please log into Blackboard often and use the discussion boards that I'm posting there so that you can ask me questions, you can offer ideas for reaction papers to other students, and definitely don't forget to give me those pointers about how I can make these next few weeks together before your successful completion of the class. How can I make these next few weeks together an easier transition for all of us involved? Okay, I will look for those comments in the discussion board, and I'll see you at the next mini lesson.